The human mind, an uncharted sea of mystery, an entity so advanced that despite living within it all of our lives, there are still facts about ourselves that we discover, and secrets that may forever be dormant. One brain is not exactly like the next, and it's important to note that how we process information, how we see the world, how we experience senses, are nothing alike to the person next to us. So it's always a captivating experience when we get to enter the minds of others. It leads to intense movies like Inception and haunting experiences like Everywhere at the End of Time by The Caretaker. We may never truly get a first-hand experience of what a human being is going through, but pieces like this may give us a basic understanding of how they are feeling. I absolutely eat pieces of content like this up, and while they're great ways to experience the horrors of the human mind, what if you wanted to experience these in a much more direct manner? Today I'll be presenting 3 games that, while being different externally, all have an aspect of experiencing the horrors and hardships that people go through in their day-to-day lives, whether it's brought on by themselves or the world around them. The 3 games that I'll be talking about today are AI the Somnium Files, Lisa the Painful, and Celeste. And while I don't have the knowledge to fully understand the psychology of what these characters are going through, all 3 of these games excel at letting us capture a glimpse of the pain that their characters carry. Just a fair warning before we delve deep into this, there will be spoilers for each of these games in this video. I will give warnings before they happen, but just be cautious of them before we proceed. I 100% recommend experiencing these games before I spoil some of the goodies that they contain. I should also point out that while I don't get into them too much, there are some very uncomfortable topics within this video, and if you want to turn away here, then there is no harm in doing so. But with that stated, let us delve deep into the human mind. AI, or I, the Somnium Files, is a detective game in which Abyss agent Konami Date is on the hunt for a serial killer behind the new Cyclops killings. Using in-universe technology, Date is able to sync his mind with people related to the case, from suspects to witnesses to at times attempted homicides, and delve into their dreams, all in an attempt to discover clues that might help crack the case. With the aspect of dreams being so prevalent to the story, you alongside with Date will not only be piecing together information about the case, but also learning more about the cast of characters along the way. It uses these systems to its fullest advantage, allowing us to see what exactly makes them tick, and while you don't get to see into the dreams of everyone, you spend so much time with the cast that by the end of the game you end up adoring most of them. And while exploring these dream worlds are generally lighthearted parts of the game despite the overall depressing themes, there is one dream sequence that nearly broke me as a human being. This is where we get into spoilery territory of the game, and while I don't spoil everything, I do spoil some crucial parts of the game, and it's better if you experience it for yourself. If you don't want to be spoiled, then I'd recommend clicking to this part of the video, but just be cautious of the video previews while scrubbing. The dream sequence that nearly broke me was Oda's mom, Mayumi. This woman, who seems like she walked straight out of a Pokemon game, is the mother of Oda, a 24-year-old otaku and supposedly local hunk. However, when he and his unreciprocated crush Aset become victims of attempted homicide, a knife stabbed into Oda and an Odoroki man chocolate were found at the crime scene and were directly linked to Mayumi. Despite this evidence, Date refuses to believe that she is the culprit and delves into her mind to prove this. However, Mayumi is hiding a secret, or rather, it's something that she is unaware of. Mayumi suffers from dementia. When Date and his eyeball-made humanoid companion Aiba awaken within her somnium, her dream takes place within her home and former diner, but something is off. Corners of the room are physically gone, and despite spending every day of her life in this building for at least 24 years, Mayumi can't seem to remember it. Furthermore, significant features of the diner, such as the clock in her somnium either refusing to move or whirling by at unreadable speeds, and the calendar's date jumping around incoherently, paints an image that for Mayumi, time has ceased. Her memories have escaped her and lack meaning chronologically, and the world around her blurs by. Adding her husband's death, her son pushing her away, and her diner being closed to the equation, and in a way, not only has Mayumi forgotten the world, but the world has forgotten her. It not only shows how isolating the world can be for someone suffering from dementia, it makes a firm statement on how we treat our elders, how important our memories are, how important that we take the time to appreciate those around us. Do yourself a favor and call your parents, or someone you love, or spend some time forming relationships, because this time is some of the most important that you can ever have. And while Mayumi can't remember the finer details, the one thing that remained clear was the love for her family, as every memory with them she clung on to dearly and held close to her heart. Family was a big player in the themes of Mayumi's story, and it's an equally important theme in the story of Brad from Lisa the Painful. In a macho-driven world where anyone capable of birth was removed from the face of Olathe, a man lacking purpose is suddenly given one fateful day when he comes across the first girl that the world has seen in years. Brad takes her in and names her Buddy, and with the help of his 3 friends, Cheek, Sticky, and Richard, they formed a makeshift family, and Buddy was a secret that the 4 of them would keep. Things were not meant to last, however, as one day, years after adopting Buddy, Brad comes home to find it destroyed and ransacked in the nearly dead body of Cheeks, who informs Brad that the secret is out. Richard and Sticky are nowhere to be seen, and Buddy is gone. But something that's made immediately apparent before Brad sets out on his rescue mission is Brad is not the most mentally stable man. A survivor of heavy abuse at the hands of his father, haunted by the trauma of his sister's suicide, and forced to live in a depraved and decrepit world, Brad struggles not only with trauma, but struggles with a little blue pill known as joy. Joy is stated to make you feel nothing, and sometimes feeling nothing can mean everything to a person like Brad. There are some side effects, however, with the most apparent one being the increase in violent tendencies. As Brad traverses the land of Olathe, occasionally he will lose control of himself and act on instinct rather than thought, and when Brad isn't taking it, he's haunted by vivid flashbacks of the abuse he sustained and visions of his deceased sister. The tendencies and increasingly apparent visions continuously push Brad to not only be protective of Buddy, but also to control her. All of these fears culminate in a very important set of events that happen in the second act of the game, and yes, there are going to be spoilers, so go to this part of the video if you want to avoid them. After traveling through the now war-torn land of Olathe, Brad comes across not only Rick, but later Buddy, and 2 things would be made apparent to him. Firstly, Rick and Sticky were involved in the kidnapping of Buddy and were intending to sell her to a warlord's army. Secondly, Brad would later find Buddy close by in a cave, and after inquiring about her whereabouts, Brad would learn that while on the run, that Sticky at best told Buddy, a child, her role in repopulating the world, and at worst, potentially assaulted her. Brad is understandably angered by this information, and knowing that an army along with Sticky were creeping towards their location, Brad and Buddy leave the cave only to be ambushed by a man named Buzzo and his cronies. Rather than being after the girl, it seems like Buzzo's only purpose is to make Brad suffer, and to destroy any potential connection that he may have with others. He would show Buddy a sight that no child should ever behold, and forces Brad to consume an overdose on joy, to show her that he's just like the creeps he tries to protect her from. Brad passes out because of this and is brought to a land in his dreams. The world is drenched in blood, the world around him empty, and a giant phallic monolith of Sticky is erected out of the ground, who informs Brad that what he did needed to be done. The series of events that happened in the second act of the game are some of the most important when it comes to portraying Brad's insecurities. Brad was abandoned, neglected, and abused by the people who should have cared about him, and when he took solidarity from his childhood friends, they would later betray him for personal gain. This, paired with the bloodshed he experienced both prior and after the apocalypse, are mirrored within the setting of his dream. The blood that's been shed due to his actions has to be acknowledged as he trudges through it. The cave is dark and empty and has this harrowing feeling that embodies emptiness, and when Brad puts in the effort to climb his way to building a connection with others, it's ultimately destroyed by their betrayal. This segment, although short, encapsulates perfectly what Brad was feeling at the time, but by trudging through it and accepting it, Brad's personality takes a shift for the worst. From this point onwards, Brad's actions throughout the game seemingly become more distressed and violent as he carves his way through Olathe, doing all this in a vain attempt to protect Buddy. Whether or not Buddy needed protection isn't the point. Brad consciously destroys the world and the people who live within it, all to pursue an admittedly selfish goal of forever hiding Buddy because of his fear of society. He ultimately puts Buddy through more trauma than his father did, just so he could attempt being better than his dad and internally mend the mistakes he made with his sister. He forced Buddy to stay in her room, he forced her to kill innocent people when she was just a child, and he kept following her when it was evident that she was uncomfortable with his actions. Brad is ultimately the villain of Lisa the Painful, and while his actions were always well intended, in the process of accomplishing his goals, he became a feared figure to those around him. He slaughters hundreds, steals from the innocent, kills his own friends, and cuts down the last blood moon tree for personal gain, causing an extinction that parallels the extinction of mankind if Brad gets what he wants. It creates a really interesting dynamic in which the perspective of Brad doesn't necessarily line up with the world around him. So if AI the Somnium Files is a story on viewing other people and Lisa the Painful is a tale on how the world views us, us, then Celeste is a story of how we view ourselves. Celeste is a game where you climb a mountain, which on paper is easy enough until you realize that mountain climbing is a monumental task that takes both mental and physical prowess in order to excel. Madeline isn't exactly the toughest cookie around, but what she lacks in typical strength, she excels at through her foolhardy and courageous personality and her abilities. As Madeline scales Celeste Mountain, the only thing that can slow Madeline down is herself. Madeline has issues dealing with anxiety, panic attacks, depressive episodes, and low self-esteem, and as she continues to scale peak after peak, these feelings manifest not only within her dreams, but as someone she can perceive, a darker, more sinister figure embodying all of the things she despises about herself. Although Madeline can be brash, her personality is usually very go-gettery and she has a natural keenness to help others. But internally, these characteristics are twisted and villainized by Madeline's inner self, dubbed Madeline by the game's community and later officially. And yeah, spoilers, this timestamp 3, 2, 1, go. Madeline, in her own terms, is Madeline's pragmatic side. She's both twisted logic and anxiety in its purest form. Her goals are to be that nagging voice in your head that tells you what you can't do, to undermine each act of kindness and bravery through antagonization, and has tendencies to block progress, whether by physically chasing Madeline like a looming feeling you can't shake off, by outright mocking her, being in the vicinity when a traumatic event is occurring, or sometimes having the ability to sever relationships. Living with anxiety and depression not only puts a strain on your mental health, but it can also make coexisting with other people a steep cliff to climb. It can taint a perfectly good moment, it can tear once perfectly good relationships asunder, and as much as you try to run away from it, distract yourself from it, or simply try to ignore it, trauma, anxiety, depression, and mental illness is something that's a part of you, eating at you every step of the way to a point where you become the greatest enemy to yourself. Madeline describes what she's feeling as like she's at the bottom of the ocean, in a small claustrophobic environment that's somehow exposing at the same time, floating in the abyss and going in random directions to try and escape it. This feeling is what led Madeline to climb Celeste Mountain, and by breaking down these feelings and being able to share them with other people, she would eventually come to realize that there really is no way of distancing herself from her own mind. She would eventually grow to accept and express her own feelings, rather than continuously try to push them down while maintaining a straight face. Mind you, Madeline didn't completely get rid of her problems, and getting to the point she's at took her a lot of effort, but by continuously trying to understand her own feelings and learn how to cope with them, she pushes the energy that was used to hate on herself and works with every part of her being to eventually reach the peak of the mountain. If there was one idea that the developers wanted to convey more than self-acceptance, it would be the importance of perseverance, to keep trying when all seems hopeless. This is demonstrated in the gameplay by not only having player deaths be nothing but a minor setback, but encouraged by the game as a way to learn from your mistakes. It shows us that by making plenty of mistakes in life and holding our head up high and trudging through it, we can accomplish great things that we didn't even think were possible. The message of perseverance is also demonstrated by the characters that inhabit the world. Madeline, of course, is a great example, but Theo and Mr. Oshiro are great examples of the importance of persevering and moving on from the past. Mr. Oshiro, in particular, shows us what Madeline easily could have been, by being negligent and dismissive to what's going on in the present and focusing too much on what was or could have been. Oshiro lives within a fantasy world of his own creation, and when offered help to clean the hotel's obvious disrepair, he would refuse to break his bubble of safety if it meant fully acknowledging his current state. Theo, on the polar opposite end of the spectrum, is afraid of mediocrity and the status quo. He works a dead-end job that he hates, he tries to make every day count and live unpredictably, and while he isn't particularly jealous of his sister and holds a lot of admiration for her, you can kinda get the sense that he feels insignificant when compared to her success. While he is by no means perfect, I would argue that in theory, Theo represents everything that Madeline wants to be in the future emotionally. With his eyes set on a never-ending goalpost, Theo constantly marches his way through life almost carelessly, even despite his qualms and fears. Chapter 5's Mirror Temple shows us parts of Theo's personality that he doesn't want others seeing. A barrage of eyes stalk and watch his every move, a constant gaze that feels intoxicatingly repressive beams down on him. In response to this repressive atmosphere, he creates a see-through shield around himself. I personally speculate that Theo's additions to the mirror world represent that there were plenty of fears that Theo himself goes through, but the lack of forming a darker self like Madeline in the forming of a transparent shield around him implies that he acknowledges these repressive thoughts, but is able to keep them from affecting him, unlike Madeline. In fact, Madeline even uses his shielded self as a way to burst through her own fears throughout the temple. This, paired with him teaching Madeline tricks to keep her anxiety at bay, further solidifies the theory that thematically he's everything that Madeline wants to be emotionally. And by using his wisdom and advice, combined with her prior experiences and a foolhardy personality, Madeline is not only able to scale the mountain and reach its peak, but was able to make peace with herself. The main points that I would take away from these games are empathy, understanding, and forgiveness. Whether someone is cripplingly lonely or seemingly carefree and aloof, it's important to remember that you don't always know what others are going through, and you should always try to be respectful and patient with people. But more importantly, you need to be respectful and patient with yourself. It can be easy to slip into fits of self-hate and self-defeating attitudes that seem like an unscalable mountain, but sometimes the best thing you can do is step back and take a breather. Take your focus away from yourself and either take the time to appreciate the moment that you're in, or set a goal to improve your situation, no matter how small, insignificant, or monumental it may be, and to slowly climb your way out of that deep, dark pit of seething hatred that's bringing you down. And sometimes these goals are unachievable, sometimes they take time to do, and sometimes you doubt that you'll be able to complete them, and that's perfectly okay. You are a human being, an individual, and sometimes what's started is never completed, and the most important thing that you can do is go at your own pace, one summit at a time. Thank you so much for watching this video. All three of these games are really cool, and while I spoiled some aspects of them, there's still a lot of content there for you to experience, and I 100% please check these out. The Somnium Files in particular kind of flew under a lot of people's radar when it's honestly kind of a gem. And now for the fun part of the video where I get to shill myself out. If you like this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as it further incentivizes me to make more content like this. And if you have any corrections or anything you'd like to add, I'd really like to hear it, as discussing these games is honestly really fun. Before I wrap this video up, I just wanted to give a thanks to everyone who supported me throughout this. Making content like this is really hard to do, and while I do enjoy making it, the most satisfying part for me is seeing people watch it in the end. But thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Oh!